you don't come play with us, then we will kill you.
Welcome back to season 3 of the Dudes of the Dead podcast. If you missed season 1 or season 2, including our top 10s of 2021 and 2022, you can find all of our previous episodes on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, and Google. I'm Leatherface Lee.
And I'm Maniac Mike. This season, we've added an email for the show, dudesofthedead@gmail.com. Feel free to email us your thoughts on the films we discuss, and we're also asking for listener requests for season 4. So email us a film if you'd like us to review it in season 4, whether it's a personal favorite, a controversial film, or a hidden gem starring Nicolas Cage.
We can't wait for you to listen to season 3, including some appearances from friends of the pod, as well as some bonus episodes. We're also on YouTube at Dudes of the Dead podcast.
This season, we're excited to review some standouts from 2022, some older classics, and as well as some new films from 2023. We'd also greatly appreciate if you'd be willing to leave us a rating and a review. Thanks for joining us again, and
We'll see you in the aisles.
All right, welcome listeners to season 3, episode 8 of Dudes of the Dead podcast. And today we're going to take a look at a film from 2022/2023. This is Skinamarink.
In this house. In this house.
So Skinamarink gets a 5.1 on Internet Movie Database and a 71% critic score, but a only 44% audience score, which is not overly surprising to me. This was directed by Kyle Edward Ball, who's a Canadian director. And the cast isn't really noteworthy, as there's scarcely anything in this film that could be considered a performance, other than a few distorted lines of dialogue. So we'll skip that part. The synopsis. So we have two children who wake up in the middle of the night to find that their father is missing and all the windows and doors in their home have vanished. And this is set in 1995. Good year. So I chose this film because of all the buzz that this was getting online. All I've been hearing about for the last few weeks on all my horror things is Skinamarink, and even like a mainstream CBC article talking about it. And it's interesting because this is really a love or hate film, it sounds like. I've heard some people say this is the scariest film they've ever seen in their life. And many other people think this is just a dreadfully boring 100 minutes. And we'll figure out whether which category you and I fall into. So Kyle Edward Ball actually started on YouTube, and he has a channel called Bite Size Nightmares. And so what he would do is get people to comment on his videos, and then he would make short films trying to encapsulate their nightmares into a short film, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's a cool idea.
And I guess this was shown at a film festival in 2022 and accidentally got uploaded and then put on torrent sites. It was put on YouTube. And the director was super choked. This is his first film he ever directed. But all these people saw it. It was getting a strong reaction. And he was on the one hand happy, like, okay, people are watching my film, appreciating it, but this is my first movie and I'm not making any money off of this. So I think there was some infighting online, I guess, between people scolding others who were watching this film and others saying we should wait until it's released. Anyway, so it was officially released 2023. And again, continues to get a lot of buzz. I think it's doing very well. The movie was made for a meager $15,000 and has now made crazy, like millions of dollars. Skinamarink is an experimental film. Very grainy audio and visual quality. Kind of looks like a really old, bad VHS. The visual quality is very low grade. You hear like muffled sounds. You never really see the subjects. You always see kind of the negative space. We get lots of shots of feet, of television playing old cartoons, corners of rooms, shots of Lego, kind of cracks of doors. We know roughly that there's 4 characters. There's 2 kids, a father and a mother, but we never really see them, at least not full on. And yeah, you are kind of left to figure out what is happening in this house.
In this house.
But this is very experimental because you're only seeing shots and you're hearing some noises. But this is very avant-garde in its style and very experimental, doing something kind of like Blair Witch Project when it first came out. I think it's kind of inventing a new subgenre sort of in horror. Like to my understanding. Nothing like this has quite
Yeah.
been done. Although I'll talk about another film in a little bit. So I guess I'm curious, when you watched this, what were your expectations going into it? What did you know about it when you sat down to watch it?
I didn't know very much.
Like, did you know it was an experimental film that was not okay?
I expected a little bit more story, or at least something to fill in the gaps. I didn't know how experimental it was until afterwards. And to be fair, that was somewhat deliberate because I tried not to watch too many trailers or too much. So after I watched it, I looked at Chris Stuckman's review, which rang true for me. And he mentioned something.
He really liked it though, right?
He really liked it.
Yeah.
Partly for the reason that he's a filmmaker as well. And the idea that something this experimental is in the theaters making money is something that is hopeful, I think, for aspiring filmmakers.
Yeah. To spend 15 grand, make a movie. That's
And Stuckman also references Blair Witch Project, that he didn't think a film like that could ever get made again. Now, Blair Witch has a narrative structure and it has a story, like a through line. You can, there are elements of this film in Blair Witch, something that's like indistinct or it's off kilter or whatever. But
I guess like Blair Witch, so it's kind of revolutionary, right? Like
exactly.
We had not seen a found footage film really when Blair Witch came out.
Yeah.
And I've never really seen, other than one example, but it wasn't a horror film, seen a movie like this.
What's the one because I don't know if I've seen one like this.
Have you seen Wavelength?
No, I've heard of it though.
Okay. So in my film studies course in university, we watched Wavelength, which is utterly painful. Like, I dare you to try and watch this movie. It's on YouTube. It's basically just like a room. It's like an hour and a half, and the lighting changes and you hear like annoying, grating, buzzing sounds, and it plays with like the contrast. So it's similar to this in that it's kind of just looking at the elements of film,
right,
and playing around with those. But you're basically just watching a room for more than an hour.
So I might not be.
I think maybe this was actually an inspiration.
Okay.
I think he took Wavelength at least as part of his inspiration for this film.
I mean, I may not be a typical viewer. Like, my background is I have a music degree. And what this film reminds me of is somebody like, I'm not going to get the name. I hope I'm going to get the name right.
Okay. So the name I was desperately searching for there was John Cage.
Philip Glass?
No, Glass is the next generation of 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which was an experimental piece of music. And it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence.
Oh, interesting.
So the concept, and for me, it resonated with this film because when I watched the film, it's funny because when we first started this, Mike asked me if I would go back and watch this. And I think I will, partly because I think there are elements of this film that ask the viewer to go inside themselves and ask themselves, what is it about this that you find frightening, if you find it frightening? And there were elements of this film that I found frightening.
At least that song was only 4 minutes and 33 seconds, not 100 minutes.
Yeah, okay. That's totally fair. However, that's the connection that I made with this film, is that it's asking you to actively participate, at least this is my interpretation, in terms of what do you find frightening, as opposed to showing you what because it doesn't show you much, but there are concepts that it's playing with. Are you afraid of being alone? Are you afraid of the dark? Are you afraid of things like that? Whole concept to me is terrifying, that openings in your house would disappear, doors, windows, closets.
Which to me really rings true of nightmares or dreams when you're trying to do something.
Yes.
And you can't, like, you're trying to walk somewhere, but your feet won't move, or you're trying to get somewhere, but your car won't start. And so that kind of idea, like you're trying to leave the house, but you can't because the windows are disappearing, the doors are disappearing, like that, I thought was.
I think there are going to be a lot of disappointed people in the theaters because, like many films, not that there have been many films, but like many films, they're marketed incorrectly. They want to get bums in seats. So your trailers or, your taglines are trying to bring people into the theaters, which I think in some ways is unfair, because I think it's only fair to tell people, and maybe this would really limit your audience, hey, this is a pretty out there experimental film, rather than having people come in and going, what the hell is this? What did I just pay $12 for? I started to say, I watched Chris Stuckman's review, and he what filled in a bit of the gap for me was he referenced the term creepypasta, which I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. And then I went up and looked. And so these are internet horror related kind of legends. So, and I had no idea what those were. I do have a point here. So the point was that kind of filled in some gaps for me about, oh, okay. So it seems to me like Kyle Edward Bell is taking these creepypasta stories, and maybe it's a pastiche of a bunch of different stories, and creating a film that's asking the viewer to reflect and say, what is it that I find frightening, as opposed to telling you should be afraid of this. It's a jump scare, or it's, a nun that's been possessed, or, whatever.
Yeah. Which I would appreciate for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And I can't help but feel like it was just an objective mistake to make this movie 100 minutes.
Yeah, it's too long.
And yes, there were people who thought this was the scariest movie ever. But there was also, for every one of those, it sounds like maybe 10, like a 44% audience score. And I think ourselves include, like, you and I are film buffs. We have a film podcast. Like, I watch all sorts of obscure films and appreciate them. And I feel like I would have loved and appreciated this film if it was 40 minutes or half an hour.
Yeah, this begs to be a short.
I said the runtime is sadistic. Like, I'm watching this while I'm 20 minutes in, and I went to check the timestamp because I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I saw it was an hour and 40 minutes, and I was like, wow.
I was about the same, actually. About 20 minutes in, I'm like, holy shit, I can't believe.
And I thought maybe it would ramp up, or maybe there'd be a few more. Like, there's so many shots of just Lego, or so many shots of a television, which I think you could have had some of that.
Yeah.
But I don't think you needed as much. And I think there are lots of people who would have, because I do appreciate what he's doing, and I do think it can be very effective. And I agree that depending on the nightmares you've had or what you find scary, or like, you do have to really like almost get on the same wavelength as the film to appreciate it. But 100 minutes is really crazy almost.
Even to be generous, a 75-minute runtime is too long for this, unless you do something different. Because I did find elements of the film scary.
Yes.
I find that television flicker, that old school television flicker, quite creepy and eerie, particularly in a completely dark room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Under what conditions were you watching this film?
Not on a big screen. So I was in my office watching it on my computer.
Was it dark?
Relatively, although I have a few lights in my office or whatever, but the overhead lights were turned off. It was basically just the flicker of the computer screen.
Because I watched this in a completely pitch dark room, 75-inch television. I felt like I tried to immerse myself.
Yeah, that would have been a better experience, I think, for me, but not for 140 minutes.
Well, that's just it. Like, you saying, like, yeah, the TV screen is eerie. Kind of the Lego shots are kind of off-putting the first couple times you see them. But when you see them so many times, like, it almost starts to lose its effectiveness.
Exactly.
Like, I just can't help but feel that just objectively, this would have been a better viewing experience for everybody, even if you appreciate and loved it at 100 minutes, if it were just shorter.
Yeah. And sorry, it wasn't 100, was not 140 minutes.
No, sorry. An hour and 40 minutes, but it was 100 minutes.
100 minutes. Yeah.
That's right.
Sorry,
that's right.
I made that mistake too. I appreciate what he is trying to do. And I think he's got an interesting eye as a director about what he's choosing to do or not to do, and the subject matter that he chose. But I don't feel that this warranted the runtime that it had.
Like, an hour and 40 minutes is even like on the longer end of a conventional film.
I agree. I get quite irate when I'm watching a 2-hour horror film, unless it's really blowing my socks off.
Yeah.
Like, you better do something interesting if you're going to try and hold me for 2 hours. 90 minutes to me is a perfect length. And I feel like movies in general, but horror movies particularly, really push the limits of viewer patience.
Yeah. Ultimately, I was bored by the end. But I think had it been shorter, I would have really loved it and be singing its praises and appreciated it for what it was doing.
If I was going in thinking I was going to get a traditional horror film, I'd be super frustrated about 30 minutes in, going, if I lasted that long.
Especially if you paid for it. And you and I appreciate David Lynch.
Yeah, 100%.
So think about how many people can't sit through a David Lynch film.
Yeah.
And at least David Lynch has, you get to see faces and there's dialogue.
Yeah.
And like it's quite obscure still, but there's a lot to.
I mean, there's narrative. It might be disjointed
Yes.
and nightmarish or dreamish, but there's narrative.
So this just pushes so far beyond that. So the amount of people I feel like that can appreciate this film would be very, very small. The one thing you might enjoy from this movie is trying to figure out kind of what is happening.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think there's some different clues that point to maybe different theories in terms of what is happening. I think it does successfully kind of capture that dreamlike quality.
Yeah.
Like when you wake up in the middle of the night, if you're discombobulated or you're having one of those kind of like lucid nightmares where you feel like you're kind of awake, kind of asleep.
Yeah.
Like it does kind of capture those elements. And I can see how that would resonate with some people. So yeah, I don't know. Is there anything you want to, I think everything else to say about this film might involve some spoilers, but
I'll say this before we go into spoilers. Skinamarink can be more confounding than frightening, but for viewers able or willing to dial into its unique wavelength, this unsettling film will be difficult to shake.
I went into this film knowing it was experimental, knowing it would be kind of hard to watch.
See, I didn't know that.
I tried to set myself up for success, sit in the dark room,
Yeah.
had the surround sound on. I did not have a device on me to look at. And I did try to get on the same wavelength, and I still couldn't for the duration of the film. So if I can't even do that, like I wonder how many people, but it's true. It is true. I think for some people, that is true. Do you recommend this film to people?
I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'm going to say no. I don't recommend this.
Yeah, I'm going to say no as well. But I think if you go to his YouTube channel, The Bite-Sized Nightmares, most of his work is very reminiscent of Skinamarink.
Okay.
And he did a short film called Heck that is essentially doing the same thing as this film, but it's 28 minutes. So I think you should go to his YouTube channel, watch Heck, or watch some of his other shorts that are maybe 4 or 5 minutes. If you like those, you can maybe work your way up to Skinamarink.
That's a good recommendation.
And especially Heck, I think at 28 minutes is maybe the sweet spot. And I think for what he's doing is cool and can be effective.
Agreed.
Probably at a shorter duration. So maybe start there. And if you love it and you want more, then you can sit through this for 100 minutes.
The audience score would indicate that people are seeing it, but not everybody's getting it.
Yeah.
So less than 50%. But the critic score would indicate that somebody with a critical eye is looking at this film going, okay, he's doing something interesting here. I like what he's offering.
Like, I'd be curious to see what he does next. So is he going to follow this kind of experimental film, like try to make something else, be like the Shyamalan of experimental horror films or something, or whether he'll move to something more conventional. And this movie might be worth watching for the water cooler effect. Like, because it's getting so much hype and attention, it's kind of fun to just check it out, hear what it's about, just to talk about it. But you probably won't enjoy it.
What's the title referencing? Because am I going crazy? Like, wasn't there like a Peter, Paul, and Mary? Like,
it's Sharon, Lois, and Bram.
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
Skinamarink, dinky dink,
yeah, okay.
Skinamarink. Which apparently he spelled it differently than the song.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's just because they're kids. There's the children's cartoons on. I don't recall a Sharon, Lois, and Bram reference in the film itself other than the title.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with them to have picked up on that. But
if you are going to try and watch this and you have a cell phone, like lock it in a drawer somewhere. Like I think you do need to set yourself up for success. Like turn off the lights, maybe put on headphones. Like try to get on the wavelength of this movie if you can, because maybe you'll enjoy it more. But if you like just kind of flop down on Friday night and like have your cell phone, you'll be scrolling within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think so.
And it's not a film that you can disengage from.
So we're not going to do spoilers because there really aren't that many spoilers because there's not really much of a plot. But I think there is something going on. Like you're trying to figure out what is happening. So we'll discuss that a little bit afterwards.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to hear that, then I guess those are technically spoilers. So next episode we'll be looking at.
I don't know yet.
So spoilers.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
Really not much happens in this movie. I mean, the kid stabs himself in the eye. I think that's the only real horror element that you get. Even though they don't show it, but you see blood.
Yes.
And there's blood on the floor.
Yes.
At the end. So did you have any thoughts on what is actually happening here?
I have no other than, I suppose I do have a thought. My thought was just that there's
So we know the kid falls down the stairs, right?
Right.
So the kid falls down the stairs. I think he had to go to the hospital or something. The dad says something.
Yeah.
The dad's on the phone. Otherwise, these kids wake up in the middle of the night. Their parents are gone. And there's a voice kind of beckoning them to the basement or beckoning them upstairs. And then the kid stabbed himself in the eye at the end.
The mom disappears.
Yeah.
Partway through the film.
Yeah.
And there are flashes of, well, this used to be a door, or this used to be a window. And
right.
It's not
so those
there
things
anymore.
are disappearing. The toilet disappears.
Yeah.
Yeah. So over 100 minutes, like that's essentially the plot, which we just summarized in about 30 seconds. So there's a scene at the end where to me, it looks like he's maybe lying in bed and maybe he's woken up and you almost see a face, but it's kind of obscured.
Mm.
And I think it's his mother perhaps saying like, go back to sleep. Maybe that's what I thought she was saying. So I think that suggests perhaps the whole thing was like a dream or a nightmare.
Okay.
And the kid wakes up and you can see, to me, it looks like a face, but it's kind of blurry.
Okay.
And so perhaps that's suggesting that maybe this whole movie was just a nightmare that he was having and he wakes up in this end. Yeah. The other thing I wondered about is perhaps because we know the kid fell down the stairs, but maybe he's dead. And maybe this is him like experiencing. So most ghost narratives, it seems like if you die in the house, you can't leave. Like you're stuck in the house. So because it's kind of this obscure sensation of reality that maybe he's on the other side. And so he's experiencing the house in like an unconventional way.
Right.
And if he tries to leave the house, like the doors disappear, or the windows disappear. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering perhaps like maybe he's dead and this is him experiencing his house like as a ghost or from the spirit realm and for that reason, it's not conventional. It's
That's
kind
an
of
interesting perspective. But then how would you explain like him going to the hospital and what, like, wouldn't he have been?
But yeah, so that's where, I mean, obviously nothing in this film really makes perfect sense. But if he didn't go to the hospital, maybe he died, or maybe he went to the hospital and died.
Right.
But his spirit is trapped in the house.
Okay.
And he's kind of like
and
remembering
the director didn't give us the full details of like a parent's grief after the death. Like, because I thought.
But could they, like, I know there's the scene of the mother and she's like sitting on the bed,
Mm-hmm.
kind of staring away.
But the telephone conversation, doesn't he say like he went to the hospital, but everything's okay, yada, yada. Now, that's not to say that he couldn't have been brought home. Maybe there was head trauma. Maybe he died in his sleep or whatever. Like there's other ways to explain that. But I kind of like that theory, that explanation of the film, because it would fit a bunch of the jigsaw pieces together for me.
Yeah. Like how would a ghost experience being trapped in a house?
Right.
And maybe it's not like, oh yeah, I'm going to walk into the kitchen and I'm going to open the fridge, but it's like, oh yeah, I have memories and like elements of my childhood or my house.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember my Legos and my kids' cartoons, but it's all very abstracted. To me, that might be kind of neat and I could appreciate that. There's also a shot near the end where it shows the house like almost looks like it's in another plane or another dimension. Yeah. So then, A, it could be a nightmare. B, were they abducted by aliens or something? Are there another dimension, but then the doors are disappearing? Or is this just supposed to be a nightmare on film?
Mm-hmm. Let's fly the theory that if he's interested in cartoons and knew those ones were out there, oftentimes in cartoons, they are playing with the boundaries between life and death and stretching the planes of existence. Like a house can be really weird shapes or it can be really long or really wide or really tall or whatever. So I wonder if there's an element of that in there as well, is that he's kind of playing with this.
And I don't know enough about those specific cartoons.
Yeah, me neither.
Maybe there's something in the episodes of those cartoons that maybe he's referencing.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if as this movie gets watched over and over, do you remember Secret Window with Johnny Depp?
Yep.
So that's a Stephen King story.
Yep.
And there's a sequence where the character comes down the stairs and they focus in on the mirror. Well, everything past the mirror point is no longer reality.
Yes.
So I wonder if in hindsight analysis, if there's going to be a point where there's a recognizable place where either we know the character's dead or there's a hint, or we know that it's a nightmare, and maybe not. Maybe it's always going to be obscure. But
and the other thing, did you get the sense the parents were getting a divorce or they were separating? Because he's talking to her on the phone, but presumably then she's living somewhere else.
Yeah, good question.
Because I think the dad is missing.
Yeah, he's missing. I made the leap that he was living there, but was just missing when they woke up.
Mm-hmm. Like the way the mom sitting on the bed, kind of looking dejected and sad. Like, I wonder if this is about maybe the kids experiencing the nightmare of like their parents getting divorced or separated, and how, I don't know. Yeah, there's interesting theories.
Or is that her being sad because he died after falling down the stair? Like, yeah, there's some interesting ways to interpret what might be happening in the film.
I think my favorite one would be the kid fell down the stairs. He ended up getting head trauma and dying. And this is his experience of
that's the most
experiencing the afterworld and how that might look through the eyes of a ghost or a spirit, and then him kind of seeing his parents upset about it, or and you can't leave. He can't escape the house, and that's why the doors and the windows are. So that would be my preferred interpretation.
It raises a question for me, and that is, do we need to be able to explain the narrative of a film? I mean, I think this is one of the things that and I don't know anything about the director, but I wonder if he's playing with the idea of, have we gotten to the point as an audience where we have to have our films in a box? Can we not just have a nightmare on film? Can we not appreciate that that's what it is, and that he's trying to create this vision for us, rather than that it has to be a narrative vision, somebody else's narrative vision of what this story would look like, no matter whether that story is linear, non-linear, like whatever it is. But 99.5% of films have some kind of narrative structure.
Totally.
And we rely on that as an audience to take our cues from. About maybe part of the experimental side of this film is asking that question. Do we have to have narrative to a film?
Yeah, I think that's where you can kind of have film as art, and it's more about just like, how does it make you feel? Yeah. How do you respond to it? You know, what do you get from it? But I think there's also then film as a puzzle. And I kind of like the idea is like, here's a bunch of abstracted puzzle pieces, and maybe you can put it together and find, I like games, I like puzzles. And so maybe I'm more drawn to that.
Right.
Trying to figure out, is there a puzzle that can be put together here? And is there an answer? Like trying to solve the puzzle or solve the mystery. But then I'm sure, like, I'm not really an artist, or have never been like really big into art.
Right.
But I'm sure an artist would say, you know, it doesn't, narrative doesn't matter. This is just more about how do you respond to it? How do you react to it? How does it make you feel? So that's probably more. And this one maybe more just falls into the art category.
I like those clever films often where I miss things and I have to go back to see what I missed. I think the problem I have with Skinamarink is that if it's a puzzle, what are the pieces that you're giving us? If it was visually challenging, but auditorily clean and crisp, maybe you'd say that's my clue. Or if it was both of those things, but the performances were strong and clear, maybe that's my clue. But you don't get any of those elements here. So if he is trying to piece or ask us to piece together a puzzle, what are the clues that he's giving us?
Yeah, it would have to be mostly visual. Like, I guess, what do you glean from the phone call? What do you glean from the mom looking depressed on the bed? What do you... I mean, just the very fact that it is unclean and blurry, and maybe that could speak to the idea that it is through the eyes of a ghost or a spirit, which doesn't have a perfect sense of reality. It's more abstracted. But yeah.
And here's a completely out there. So maybe the long lingering shots on Lego is actually, again, a hint about this is something that we have to construct for ourselves. This is something we have to put together. Rather than this is something that's there for you to consume.
Oh, right? So Lego's like a metaphor.
That's
I gotta build the film.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. I like that. Well, I mean, clearly he has a fascination with Lego. It definitely puts your attention on it for a long time. So yeah, maybe he wants us to. Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah. So that just popped into my head. It's like, oh, why the Lego? Like, I get it. Kids play with Lego. But why all the shots? So you could establish that without having to keep coming back to it and keep lingering on it.
This funny thing about trying to interpret art or film, or like, we're like, absolutely. Oh yeah, maybe it's a metaphor for putting on the director might be like, yeah, I just really loved Lego as a kid. I had this Lego lying around and needed something. It's funny how sometimes the interpretation may not match the intent, but you know, that's the fun part. That's why podcasts like this exist.
Just because there was no intent doesn't mean it's not there.
Totally.
And I think doesn't matter what they meant, the author, the creator, what do you take away from it? And that's why I think I'm leaning more and more towards the idea of active participation and asking the audience to say, what is it? Why did you find that creepy? What is it about that vision that you find disturbing or whatever? And that's something that we're not often asked to do as audiences because we're spoon-fed the narrative and the visuals and all the rest of it.
All right. Well,
are we still at the same point that we were before this technical spoiler section? Like, are you still saying, yeah, not really a watch?
Well,
or do you feel differently now?
I think all the things that we've said would still mostly be applicable if you went and watched like Heck, his shorter version from what I watched of it. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's a complete waste of time, but I just think most people are going to struggle with it and probably be like, that was the most boring 100 minutes of my life.
It's a big ask.
Yeah. But if you like art and everything we've said to you makes you intrigued, then there are people who are loving this film. And there are people who are saying, this is the scariest movie I've ever seen in my life. So clearly there's something here that is resonating and working for some people. And maybe it is a recommend then, because why wouldn't want to rob you of that experience? Maybe it didn't resonate with you or I, but maybe you are the person that this is one of the scariest movies you've ever seen. And so, maybe do go see it.
There you go.
Right.
I have no idea what we're doing next. So stay tuned because it'll be a surprise for everybody.
All right, surprise episode next
included.
Next episode. All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you in the aisles. Thanks so much for listening to Dudes of the Dead podcast, where Maniac Mike and Leatherface Lee break down their latest horror movie recommendations.
The show is researched, written, and hosted by Mike Vincent and Lee Neese. Produced and edited by Lee Neese. Special thanks to Aaron Jabs for the outro music. This has been a Neesely Done podcast production.